So at the top level of chess, we see a lot of standard openings. The Rory Lopez, the Italian game, the Queen's Pawn games. So when we get something offbeat, it's always a good treat when the best players in the world are in these wild positions. Now that's exactly what we saw tonight. Magnus Carlsen playing black here, and he goes in for the Norwegian Rat. More on that in a moment. Now he was playing against Fabiano Caruana, world number 2 in classical chess ratings, so a mouth-watering encounter, semi-finals of the Julius Baer Generational Cup. It's online chess, 15 minutes on the clock, 3 seconds increment, and Magnus has already taken an early lead in game 1. He had the white pieces, he beat Fabi, nice game, so Fabi's trying to strike back with white. So let's check this one out. Now Fabi kicks off with c4, but I just want to show you a pure Norwegian rat because it actually starts with e4. g6 is then the move, d4, knight f6, you let your knight get kicked and bishop e2 and this kind of stuff. You ignore the threat on the knight and you go d6. Magnus had this position a lot in Banter Blitz a few years ago on the Chess24 YouTube channel. Definitely check out those videos if you haven't. So this is the themes of the position, right? This is the pure Norwegian rat. Now Fabi goes c4, g6. This is apparently called the Great Snake variation, according to chess.com here, you know, opening explorer. The English opening Great Snake. But okay, very similar to the rat. e4, knight f6, e5, kicks the knight, and now no bishop e2 immediately. You don't want to allow knight f4. So d4 opens up this dark squared bishop, d6 chips away. And now, would you believe it, the world number 2 makes an opening mistake on move 5. He's been foiled by the rat, or the great snake, you know, whatever. So what should you do here? We'll take on d6, pawn recaptures, or you could take with the queen, go for a kind of, queen d6 Scandinavian setup, and then you can go bishop e2 or knight c3. Yeah, white's a bit better, but okay, it's the play that black's looking for, tactical, weird, whatever. But what Fabi does is go pawn f4. Looks great, but actually, out of nowhere, his centre is overextended, and bishop h6 highlights it. You simply attack this pawn, and there's no comfortable way to defend it. You know, what if you go knight e2? Well, yes, it covers the pawn, but now you've got problems with your development of the king side. Black's a bit better here. What if instead you go queen f3? You know, I was looking at this one, but then takes. And now you can't take with the f-pawn, you lose your bishop, unprotected. You can take with this one, but then knight c6 and bishop e3, and bishop takes on f4. Horrible tactic out of nowhere. You got this stuff going on, queen goes, then you check here, win a rook, and it's just brutal. You can't actually trap this knight because there's too many problems here if you try and retreat the queen. Okay, some lines we don't need to go deep on, but it just shows how you can't cover this pawn in a good way. So Fabi goes g3 and now simply takes, and if you recapture with the g pawn here, which wasn't played, then we take, queen recaptures, the centre falls apart. Just horrible. So Fabi has to go with this one. Queen takes, king takes. Look at this. It's move 8. Magnus is like a pawn better with black. Horrific position for Fabi. All his pieces on the starting squares. His king in the centre, unable to castle. Horrendous. So he goes bishop d2, maybe looking at some knight b4 stuff. Didn't like that, or wanted to swing round here. We get bishop f5. Threat to go bishop e4, win the rook. So bishop g2 and castles queenside. Monster initiative for Magnus. Pin going on down here. So king e1 breaks the pin. Knight b4, d4. Oh, excuse me. Jumps in, looks to check here, then take the rook. We see knight a3 to cover that threat, and f6 from Magnus. Yes, this pawn chain might look impressive, you know, connect 4, but it's just getting chipped away at. And what to do? You know, if you start taking here, well, you're opening more lines for the rooks. Fabi has to get developed, so he does develop this knight, and bishop e4, another great move from Magnus. If you take, then there's takes, and this exchange here is better for Magnus. You know, he's doing good, he can take a pawn, etc. So coming back here, we didn't see takes on d4. We see rook f1 just covering that knight, and now Magnus just simply takes. Bishop recaptures, and he takes on e5, and he's winning an important central pawn. Because if you recapture, the problem is we take on d2. With check, king goes, and now you've got discovered check, winning a piece. And if, like Fabi, you take on h5 first, pawn recaptures, and then try and win the pawn, still the same problems, but this time you win an exchange, you open up here, that's completely game over. So, no takes on e5, rook d1 played to protect this bishop, and now rook hf8, Magnus activates his rook, bishop c3, and rook f5 is an awesome move. Because now this time, if you try and win the pawn, out of nowhere it's mate in 7. Because we take with check, the king goes to the f-file, logical, obviously you don't want to step here. Sorry, you can't step here, the bishop covers. So it steps to f2, now you check, the king goes, and you can jump from to f3, give the check, and you have to give up the rook. If you go here, that's mate in 1, so rook takes, but still you're not getting saved, you've now left the defense here, check, and you just have to start giving up pieces, then give the check, this is a mate. So just amazing, out of nowhere, you're getting mated if you take the pawn. So rook f2 played, gives the king a square on f1, and now Magnus carries on pushing pawns, this time the h-pawn, cranking open all of these dark squares. If takes here, then takes here, and all this stuff, or takes with the rook. Many good continuations. If the bishop ever takes here, by the way, then pawn recaptures is good. Horrible passed pawn running down the board. So we see takes on e5, now played by Fabi. The rook takes with check. Thankfully now you can step to f1, but bishop e3. Nasty move to deal with. The rook jumps in, looks impressive, but watch how Magnus simplifies. He takes, pawn recaptures, and rook f5 check, forcing these rooks off the board. He didn't have to do this, but he's just simplifying. And what he's seen is that when we enter this endgame here, bishop's coming off, this is so difficult for white to hold. Because even though it's just one extra pawn, because you're down to such limited material, and knight endgames are notoriously tricky to hold if you're material down, practically speaking, this is dead lost for Fabi. So we see king e3, Magnus just jumps back with the knight. Now knight b5, and look at this for a king march by Magnus. So he abandons this c7 pawn. Here it gets taken. Now he makes his way here. Fabi has to cover. Knight b4 not only hits this pawn, but threatens knight d3 check, and it's just horrible. How would you deal with all these threats? The computer says c5 is the best move. No idea why, you're still running into knight d3 check. Everything's lost really. So Fabi goes b3, saving that b2 pawn from the check and drops. Magnus takes this one. We see knight d5, looking here potentially, and now a5, great move, because if you take here, well then there's knight c1, this one's dropping, the pawn is running, you can see the value of a5, you stop b4, just horrible. So instead, Fabi drops back. With check, now knight f1, so that he can spin round to the defense of this pawn from the d2 square. We get knight c1, knight d2, king g4, king g2, h5, king f2, and it's just brutal. Fabi just shuffling, and the e pawn runs all the way down, distracts the king, the g pawn drops. Yes, we get the check, king g2, king d2, takes, king c3, and h4, resignation. It's just absolute paralysis for Fabiano. You can win a knight, but so what? This pawn is running through, and clearly the knight can't step to either square. To stop that pawn, the king will take. It is game over. So Fabi goes down to the Norwegian Rat, or technically the Great Snake, but looks basically the same. And that put him 2 games down. Now he did make a great comeback in game 3, but game 4, here Magnus held on for the draw, so he proceeds to the winners final, where he will face Alireza Firouzja. mouth-watering encounter. I'm glad he overcame Wesley, because Wesley plays some pretty boring chess, to be honest. You know, Alireza was trying everything, King's Indians, and Wesley is just so dry these days. He really needs to work on his style, you know. He's worse than Giri back in the old days of 12 draws in the candidates. Anyway, that's the chess for this evening. I hope you enjoyed. Do subscribe, hit like, always helps me out. And if you want to see another epic game of chess, check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.